a mathematician, John Lennox, a historian of science, Stephen Meyer, and a scientist, James Tour.
John Lennox, Stephen Meyer, and James Tour give amazing evidence for the existence of God. It's absolutely awesome. So we're going to be diving into this. Shout out to the Hoover Institution.
In science. Steve?
I think the psalmist has got it right. The good Professor Dawkins, who has a talent for framing issues beautifully, nevertheless gets it wrong. That the new developments in science, especially having to do with biological and cosmological origins, are pointing to the reality of a transcendent designing creator.
Jim?
I would think the psalmist has it much, much closer.
Much closer. John? Are you going to please stick up for rationalism, and which of those two?
I'll stick up for rationalism and say the psalmist has it exactly right, that this is a word-based universe. The fact that we can describe it in mathematics, the fact that biology uses language to describe its central features of DNA, and Richard Dawkins' statement is contradicted by his own life, because he does believe actually in good and evil, apparently.
Yeah, that's awkward.
The Big Bang. Let's begin everything with an excerpt. There's a forthcoming documentary in which all three of you appear. It's called The Story of Everything. I believe it will be in theaters in the United States in April. Is that right?
The film will open in theaters across the country on April 30th.
All right. So, and it's based on your book, The Return of the God Hypothesis. And the documentary, as we will hear ourselves today, describes three of the most important recent-ish innovations in science. And we'll begin with the Big Bang.
If the universe was always here, if the universe was infinitely old, then there's nothing for a creator to do.
Steve, if the universe was always here, there's nothing for a creator to do, says Carl Sagan. During a scientific conference in 1927, a Belgian priest and astronomer named Georges Lemaitre shared a taxi with Albert Einstein. What happened during that taxi?
A fascinating story. Einstein's own theory of general relativity implied a dynamic, expanding universe outward from the beginning. He was unhappy with that conclusion.
Einstein himself.
Einstein himself. So he fiddled with his own equations to make sure that the term in the equation that described the outward push perfectly balanced with the gravitational pull, so he could depict the universe as static. Lemaitre worked with his equations and showed that even on his own terms, the universe was not static, and that it was a dynamic universe. But he also was well aware of the astronomical data coming from Mount Wilson in California, showing what is called red shift, that the galaxies are moving away from us, and we can tell that because of the way in which the light has shifted in the red direction of the electromagnetic spectrum. And so in the taxi cab on the way to this famous conference in Belgium in 1927, Lemaitre confronts Einstein with this astronomical evidence and with his own depiction, and relays his own work on his famous field equations. And Einstein is reported to have responded, he said, well, your mathematics is impeccable, but your physical intuition is abominable. And so he rejects out of hand the idea that the universe is dynamic and expanding. But 2 years later, Arthur Eddington at Cambridge urges him again to go out to Mount Wilson to see what Hubble has been seeing through the telescope. And there's some famous
Take a second to explain the red shift.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
That's important to understand.
Yeah, so the light coming from distant galaxies is, as the physicists say, shifted in the red direction of the electromagnetic spectrum. If you shine light through a prism, the light will separate into different colors, red to violet. The red light corresponds to longer wavelengths. So if an object is moving away and is emitting any kind of a wavelength, that wavelength will be stretched out. So if the object is moving away, it's going to stretch out, and the color of the light will shift towards the red direction. It will be redder than it would otherwise be. And so as Edwin...
The ship's horn as the ship pulls away from us to go off to sea.
Exactly, or think of the train whistle, you know, with the Doppler effect from high school chemistry. As the pitch drops, the wavelength is also stretching out. So as Hubble began to survey the night sky, with these new dome telescopes that were just being built in the 1920s. His photographic plates and his spectral analysis was showing that the galaxies in every quadrant that he investigated were redshifted. The light coming was being stretched, which suggested that the universe was actually expanding outward as if from a beginning point. And this was the great discovery that led to people thinking about, well, what would happen if you ran that sequence in reverse? If you back extrapolate, if you think about, well, what would if the universe is expanding outward in the forward direction of time, what would have been like 1,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago, or 1,000,000,000 years ago? However far back you go, you will eventually reach a point where all of that galactic material would have converged in the reverse direction of time to one point, which would mark this, the start of the expansion, but arguably the beginning of the universe itself.
So a young student at Cambridge, the physicist Stephen Hawking, in 1966 presented a mathematical demonstration of the singularity. I'm reading these words, but I don't understand them, John, which is where you're...
John just looks like a very happy man. He does. You know, Wes Huff said something very interesting, and a lot of people say this all the time, that there's 5 Gospels. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then the 5th one is you. And when John Lennox went on the Diary of the CEO, all the things that he said was interesting and good. But for the interviewer, he said, the reason why I would really find Christianity to be true or be interested in Christianity isn't because all the things that you said, but it's because of your life, how you live your life, your testimony. That's just so beautiful. That's so amazing. Like, oh my goodness, to think that he has all these accolades, but the way he lives his life and shares the love of Jesus, that goes so much farther than anything that you could ever imagine.
We're going to come in here. The singularity, the moment when all matter and light were infinitely tight. So as I understand it, this singularity exists somehow, I don't even know how to describe it, but it exists outside time and space because time and space haven't come into a being yet. So explain what this means, this singularity.
They're very difficult concepts, but what Hawking did was to confirm what Lemaitre predicted and what the redshift showed and the Hubble telescope and all the rest of it, and gave a stronger, more mathematical confirmation of it. And in more recent times, there are 3 brilliant mathematicians, Vilenkin, Borde, and Alan Guth, and they worked out mathematically that you just cannot have an infinite sequence going backwards in time. It's reminiscent of the old Kalam philosophical argument that you can't have an infinite sequence of steps backward in time. So from their perspective, it's established that there was a beginning. Whether you think in terms of multiverses or not, there was an absolute beginning. And that, of course, confirms the statement of Genesis, which states there was a beginning. And to my mind, it is absolutely fascinating because I was at a conference of some very high-powered physicists not far from here a few years ago, and I made the claim that Genesis, in the beginning God created, was relevant. And I was interrupted by a heckler who was a famous physicist. And he said, look, Professor Lennox, you are not saying to us, are you, that you believe that the first statement in Genesis has any relevance for us today? I said, I am. I said, of course, the Bible is not a textbook of science, but when it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, it's talking about the same heavens and earth that you study as a cosmologist. Now, I said, the interesting thing is that for centuries, what we now call science was dominated by the idea that matter, space, was eternal, because Aristotle held sway. And it was only in the 1960s that the evidence started coming in that there was a beginning. Now, I said in my country of the UK, It was resisted by the scientific establishment.
And by Einstein himself.
Einstein himself, who did later change his mind, though. Which
So
was,
the notion of a Big Bang, if the proper way to understand it, even though there's a lot of math involved, this is strictly speaking a scientific finding. This is an empirical finding. No philosopher, on the contrary, Aristotle didn't predict it. We discovered it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think we discovered evidence
James Stewart is so funny.
for it. In the 1950s, most scientists didn't believe it. It wasn't until 1964 with this discovery of the microwave background radiation.
Okay, that's another point. The microwave background radiation. Tell me what that means.
That was the convincing argument. This same thing that Steve talked about, that
It's different from the redshift. Is it? Or
a
are they
separate line
related?
of evidence
All
that
right.
provides additional confirmation at the beginning.
yeah. So there was further confirmation, and the scientific community was not there, and then all of a sudden, it started changing in the early 60s.
Okay.
Peter, can I take just another quick hit,
Sure.
cut at the Stephen Hawking result? Because what Hawking is doing
He
in
resisted it himself, didn't he?
later, after he proved the singularity theorem, then he wasn't quite sure he liked his own result, yes. But the basic idea is actually quite intuitive. According to Einstein's theory of general relativity, which is just a theory of gravity, massive bodies curve the fabric of space, or what's called space-time. And Hawking realized, he was studying black hole physics in the 1960s, and he realized that in the forward direction of time, matter, according to the astronomers, was getting more and more diffuse as the universe expanded, which meant that the curvature of the universe was getting less and less pronounced. But in the reverse direction of time, the matter would have been more and more densely concentrated. And so as you go back further and further and further, that more densely concentrated matter of the universe is causing the space of the universe to become more and more tightly curved. And if you go back far enough, you eventually reach a limiting case where you can't go back any further because the matter is so densely concentrated, it becomes infinitely dense, and the curvature goes to an infinite. And at that point, the laws of physics break down, and that's what marks the beginning of the universe.
All right. So we have here, I said we were going to go work our way through 3 of these scientific developments. But John has already touched on this. The challenge to a purely materialist view of the universe from the Big Bang, if I have it right, is that there must have been a first mover. If there was a beginning, something had to begin it.
That's the whole law of physics. Like, there has to be something moving something. It's nothing moves by itself. Okay.
Question at least it
If
raises.
matter, space, time, and energy begin at a finite time ago, then before that or independent of that, there is no matter to do the causing. So you can't have a materialistic explanation for the origin of matter itself.
Got it.
Right.
All right. Fine tuning. This is the second of the 3 developments. Once again, we'll begin with an excerpt from The Story of Everything.
The basic idea of fine-tuning is that the universe is just so, that its properties, the initial conditions, the so-called constants of physics, the laws of nature, rest on a razor's edge, so that if they were slightly different than they are in the actual universe, the universe would not be habitable. That is, it would not be compatible with life.
What's he talking about? Give us some sense of the kinds of parameters.
Well, the fine-tuning idea is just the idea that the basic parameters of physics fall within very narrow ranges, outside of which life, even stable galaxies, even basic chemistry would be impossible. So we've been talking about the expansion of the universe. It turns out that the force that is responsible for that expansion, called the cosmological constant, is fine-tuned to something like 1 part in 10 to the 90th power. A little smidge this way, a little smidge that way, you'll get either a heat death or a recollapse of the universe. The force of gravity, the strength of the force depicted by something called the gravitational force constant, the mass of the quarks, the elementary particles, all of these different parameters, the speed of light, they all fall within these sweet spots. So physicists are now talking about are living in a Goldilocks universe, not too hot, not too cold, not too strong, not too weak,
Wow.
everything just right.
So if I picture myself in a control room with knobs, any one of which, if some child walked in and bumped into any one of these knobs, the universe as we know it, and certainly human life as we know it on this planet, could no longer continue. How many knobs are there?
Several dozen, depending on which physicist you ask. The illustration that you cite is actually an illustration of one of John's teachers at the University of Cambridge, Sir John Polkinghorne, the famous physicist. He used to ask his students to depict the fine tuning. He asked them to imagine a universe-creating machine with a knob for the strength of gravity, one for electromagnetism, one for the cosmological constant, a slider for the speed of light, and so on. And the point was that each one of those parameters are precisely set, and a little bit off this way or that way, and the consequences to the possibility of life in the universe would be catastrophic.
Life in the universe, but also the ability to do chemistry? Do you run into these in your life?
Well, actually, Steve was underestimating the number of fine-tuning parameters there are. If you just change the dipole moment of water, say that word again. The dipole moment of water.
The dipole.
So just how much electron density there is on one side of the water molecule versus the other, just slightly, a fraction of a percent.
That's
very
so
small. Life becomes impossible. Everything in chemistry is balanced perfectly for us to have life.
Wow.
Fantastic. All right, you're a mathematician. How improbable is life? Is there a way of quantifying this?
It's extremely improbable. I think a very good example of a reaction to an early form of fine-tuning was Sir Fred Hoyle, who was an atheist and who was my examiner at Cambridge. And he predicted a resonance in carbon, which was later discovered. And when it was discovered, his reaction was, nothing shook my atheism like that discovery. Now, Sir Roger Penrose is one of the most brilliant mathematicians in the world, worked with Stephen Hawking and so on. And he has an analogy in his book where he says, if you want a universe with the second law of thermodynamics, where even your Cadillac will rust, everything is running down, the Creator's aim, and those are his words, he's not a believer in God, the Creator's aim must be accurate to 1 part in 10 to the power 10 to the power 123 in order to get our universe. And many people have pointed out that if you put a 1 here and a 0 on every elementary particle in the universe, you still can't write that number out. In other words, the improbability is beyond our imagining. So the idea of a creator is extremely close when you see these kind of figures. And the important thing is, the fine-tuning is something that has been scientifically established. They've got to explain it. And they don't have an explanation that actually works. Apart from the God hypothesis.
Everything Film does a really nice job of telling the story of Hoyle's discovery of these very particular parameters associated with building carbon that led him to have this change of view. And he's later quoted as saying, a common sense interpretation of the evidence suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. So, famous
is that possible?
In our fields. Yeah.
All right. The information.
Wow, that's so good. We could be sure that the Bible is what it says it is, and that it just confirms everything that is being found in science. Absolutely amazing. Shout out to Stephen Meyer, John Lennox, and James Tour, and the Hoover Institution. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day, and God bless.